Hi, I'm David Weigelt, and this is your Silver Tsunami update for Friday, October 7th, 2011. It's great to be with you. It's been a real sad week. As many of you know, we lost one of the great boomers, one of the great innovators of our time and CEOs, Steve Jobs. And you know, while I'm not going to talk extensively about that, I feel like there's been plenty of talk, and I had a post a couple of weeks ago about my thoughts about Steve and the elderly and aging and product development you might want to check out. I do think it's important for us to finally have a conversation about death. And so today I come to you from Mount Olivet Cemetery here in Frederick, Maryland, our hometown for Immersion Active. And this cemetery was created in 1850 when all of the little cemeteries associated with the churches had become too full. And so they created this place, and thank goodness they did. They actually sold chairs for $20 a share with the expectation that once it was built out, you would get 12 plots for your $20. Well, thank goodness they built this place, because the Civil War happened, and as you know, Maryland was very active when it came to those battles, and so now we have over 35,000 graves at Mount Olivet, including some very famous people like Francis Scott Key, who is the author of our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. So anyway, this is a very special place, and it's a little creepy, but I decided to make this my backdrop for today's Silver Tsunami. So I hope you enjoyed the e-brief this week. I've got three highlights for you as always. The first is out of the Atlantic, and it talks about how as a society we may be living longer, but we're not living longer because we're healthier. And you know, there's a lot of buzz around this and longevity, and frankly I feel like a lot of boomers kind of fuel this fire that, gosh, we're going to live forever and we're all living so much longer. I've even heard very reputable demographers from Harvard talk about this. But the reality is this: when it comes to longevity, over the past 100 years we have increased our lifespan by maybe 3 or 4 years. The reason we have so many more adults you know, that are older these days really comes down to two main things. The first is immunization, and the second is public sanitation. So that's the myth debunked about longevity, to the best that I understand it. And there's just some great opportunity here, though, because this article talks about the fact that while more of us are living to be older, that is significant, and it really means that we need to look more closely at the health of our older adults, which isn't so good. The bottom line is that there is an opportunity here for those supersized appetites, and I'm just excited to see companies like Golden Cuisine and Nutrisystem launch these silver or you know, older adult focused programs, and they seem like they're doing really well and going about that in a really intelligent way that helps these consumers process their lives. The second one that I want to touch on, second article, is out of USA Today, and it's a quick article about Billy Graham's new book, which is entitled Nearing Home: Life, Faith, and Finishing Well. And I didn't realize it, but Billy Graham was at one time a very good baseball player. And so apparently now he is 93 years old and not doing so well. He's very frail with Parkinson's-like diseases. He uses a walker and a wheelchair, and apparently his vision is too blurred to read at this point. But he put out this book, and it seems it seems like it really came from his heart, for which he talks about how losing his wife, you know, his wife passing before he passed was something he never expected, and how you know, it was one of his own quotes in 2006 for which he said, "I have been taught all of my life how to die, but no one had ever told me how to grow old." That was a real aha moment for him, and what triggered this book. And you know, he ultimately says, I can't truthfully say that I've enjoyed getting old. But in his case, he believes that there's a biblical basis, and his personal faith is such that God has a place for us if we're still here. And I think that the bottom line for this article is that this is important for us as marketers, because on two counts. One, there's this modality, there's this point at which coping becomes a reality for us. And yet there's also an understanding that we still serve a purpose, and whether our consumers are Christian or whatever their faith is, there's this real spirituality that comes to the surface and becomes important to us as we grow older. We need to understand those themes as marketers and as brands that are trying to connect with these consumers. The article ends with a quote from the CEO of Senior Bridge, for which he says, "People need advice like this to navigate their future." And that's where I see some of the most successful brands, including some of our clients, in terms of how they're going about connecting their brands with these consumers. It's need-based. It's helping them process their lives. It's not about advertising. And then finally, just a couple of random thoughts and quotes. As I mentioned, with the loss of Steve Jobs this week, there's plenty of stories and thoughts going around the internet about him. I encourage you to check out Immersion Active's blog post on what Immersion Active learned from Steve Jobs in one of our personal experiences with him. His thoughts about older adults and technology and product development, so check that out. But I wanted to read this quote because for all of the things going around the internet, I didn't feel like this one was getting a whole lot of attention. And there are two quotes here that are from the commencement address he delivered at Stanford in 2005, about a year into being diagnosed with cancer. The first one, he says, "No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet death is the destination that we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old and makes way for the new." And then he goes on to talk about these students as being the new. But there's a second part to that quote that is equally insightful, for which he talks about the meaning of death. It's not just about ushering out the old. He says almost everything, all external expectations, all pride of fear and embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. So definitely something for us all to think about in terms of what will likely be going through the mind of our country's adult majority. And finally, I wanted to share with you what I believe will be the sounding bell we'll be hearing from mainstream media soon, and that is that the boomers are dying. The boomers are dying. And I think this is important for us to think about as intelligent marketers who have decided to focus on these consumers. About 2 years ago, I had a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Alan Creedy, who's an end-of-life expert and consultant who works with cemeteries like this, funeral homes, and he talked about how this industry is just emerging from a very tough time for which death rates had been very low. As a result of the greatest generation and the birth rates around the Great Depression. But he talked about how the end-of-life industry, was not prepared for what was about to happen with the coming boomer generation. And so here we are, 10,000 boomers a day turning 65, who will statistically be diagnosed with one or more chronic conditions, and of course many of them will pass away. And the reality of that is that very soon we will start opening the newspaper, and I feel like we're getting there already, and we'll see every week yet another high-profile boomer who has moved on, whether it's Michael Jackson, this week Steve Jobs. And I think there's likely to be some thinking on the part of marketers and executives that maybe these aren't the consumers that we need to be targeting. And I would challenge that with, and remind everybody that the boomers and the seniors make up 100 million adults with the greatest needs and the greatest resources to fulfill those needs. And what a great opportunity for us as brands to do good while we're doing well. So that's kind of my closing thought for the day, and hopefully this doesn't bring you down. I think that, like I say every week, there's just great opportunity in age. And so I hope everybody has a great weekend. It's a beautiful fall weekend here in the Mid-Atlantic, and I hope that everybody remembers that age does equal opportunity. Thanks a lot.